In the words of Dr. V.R. Devika, Gandhi was possibly not a Mahatma dropped from heaven. He was an ordinary man who achieved extraordinary things with conviction and resolve. He was possibly a man who tried his best at every moment, and possibly this is what made him a Mahatma. This was my take and inspiration to commit myself to values and live life to the fullest every moment of it. What is your take?
वैष्णवजन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे वैष्णवजन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नाने रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे सकल लोकमा सहुने वंदे निंदा न करे केणी रे वाच काच मन निश्चल राखे धन धन जननी तेणी रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे समदृष्टि ने तृष्णा त्यागी परस्ते जेने मात रे समदृष्टि ने तृष्णा त्यागी परस्ते जेने मात रे जिह्वात के असत्य ना बोले पर धन नव जाने हाथ रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे मोह माया व्यापे नहीं जेने दृढ़ वैराग्य जेना मन मारे राम नाम शो तालिर लागी सकल तीरथ तेना तार्या दे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे वनलोभी ने कपट रहित छे काम क्रोध निवार्या रे बने नर सयो तेनु दर्शन करता कुल एको तेना तार्या दे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे
Greetings to all and Fala from E7. Today is Gandhiji's death anniversary. It is also called Martyrs Day. It is observed by all Indians. Gandhiji taught us the importance of good character and non-violence. I'd like to pay my respect to his great man by reading 3 of his quotes. And I makes the world the blind. Though we can never forgive, forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. In a gentle way, you can shake the world. Thank you.
A very good evening to one and all. I've been asked to talk about Mahatma Gandhi and how he has impacted my life. Well, I have been following our friend Prakash on the social media, where every week he comes out with a new edition of Chai with Pai, as in Chai with Prakash Iyer. And a couple of weeks back, he spoke about Mahatma Gandhi, and it really touched my heart. So what I am going to say today is entirely what Prakash Iyer has spoken in his edition. This was a time when Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa and was still practicing as a barrister of law in India. Those were the days when one had to travel and was waiting in the station for a train. The train would stop in the station only if it sees Britishers ready to board. But here was a night when there was not a single Britisher and it was only Gandhiji on the station. The train approached and very slowly it didn't stop but just passed by. What would Gandhiji have done? He just jumped onto the compartment, and while doing so, one of his shoes slipped and fell down. What would you and me have done in such a situation? We would have grumbled and said to ourselves, cursed our luck, etc., etc. But here was Gandhiji, who took off his other shoe and dropped it off. His co-passenger was aghast. He asked him why he did that. What was the reason for this act of his? For which Gandhiji replied, well, this single shoe is not going to be of any help to me. Why not give it to the person who gets the other shoe? What do you learn from this? A. Be a giver constantly. And B. Give it at the right time. Have the presence of mind to act according to the situation. Indeed, it's such a noble thing to give. I would like to end with Prakash's last line. Don't aim to be a go-getter always. Instead, be a go-giver. Thank you.
Hey, hi everyone. I just wish to talk about one of my favorite people of all time, a great source of inspiration. Mahatma Gandhi, I think enough has been said and written about him, but I don't wish to deify him or really make him into a saint, particularly because, like the lives of so many great people, the philosophy of his life is relevant to our daily lives too. And these are philosophies that are very easy to practice. I really want to talk about his philosophy of non-violence. So much is taken for granted. I think Mahatma Gandhi is deified. He's made into a saint. But really it's such a simple concept. The concept of non-violence is about being non-violent in thought, word and deed. It's also about inclusiveness, tolerance, acceptance, and therefore ultimately harmonious living. I guess it's equally relevant to communities like us, for a nation obviously, for the world as a whole, but more importantly for each of us in our lives. We can just be non-violent in thought, word, and deed. Be tolerant and accepting of people. Not just be tolerant and accepting of different faiths and religions, but also be accepting of different concepts, different philosophies, and different opinions. Then I think those are the kind of philosophies that will help us lead a very happy life. That's it from me. Thank you so much.
This conference will now be recorded.
Dear Aashianites, I would like to share a few thoughts on Gandhiji's principle of Satyagraha, which he followed from the days he was in South Africa till the end of his life. Satyagraha is broadly defined as a non-violent form of resistance or protest. It is a passive and a peaceful form of resistance or protest. We live in a very violent world today, and it's often thought that non-violence or Satyagraha is an outdated concept in today's world. Let us look at a few examples of how Satyagraha has been practiced around the world, and then we can decide for ourselves whether it is an outdated concept or not. The Indian freedom struggle was largely based on the principle of Satyagraha. There were a few armed struggles like the First War of Independence and the valiant efforts of Netaji, but for the most part it was based on peaceful resistance and non-cooperation. So how did Satyagraha help the Indian freedom struggle? Firstly, Satyagraha united a nation which was broadly divided into a number of small kingdoms. It brought together people from various cities, towns, even small villages under the slogan of Vande Mataram, and therefore helped in unifying the country towards a common cause. Secondly, Satyagraha enabled mass participation because it was non-violent. Not only youngsters, but elderly people, school children, women were all able to participate in this movement very actively. And thirdly, Satyagraha being non-violent, it was easier to sustain it for a long period. The Satyagraha-based freedom struggle was sustained for almost 30 years, which would have been very difficult in the case of an armed struggle. Now, is Satyagraha is not a courageous form of struggle? The Satyagrahis were a very courageous lot of people. They faced a lot of attacks by the police. Lathi charges were done. They were firing in some cases. People like Tirupur Kumaran died chanting Vande Mataram. So, and people went to jail for very long periods. So people underwent a lot of struggle, and the Satyagrahis had only one weapon in their hands, and which was their own courage. So one cannot say that Satyagrahis lacked courage in any form. The two major movements around the world which are based on Gandhiji's principles. One was the South African freedom movement. In the early stages, the South African freedom movement was a violent one, but ever since Nelson Mandela took charge of the movement, he followed the principles of Satyagraha until South Africa gained independence. Interestingly, Nelson Mandela was in jail for 27 years, and when he was released, he had no anger whatsoever against the white people. In fact, he ensured that the whites were not harmed, and none of their property was taken over by the locals. And this was very unlike the other African countries. And this has been one of the main reasons why South Africa has emerged as one of the strongest, as the strongest country in the African continent. Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement in the US was also based on the principle of Satyagraha, and he was a very ardent follower of Mahatma Gandhi. The Chipko Moment is a very interesting example of the use of passive resistance or non-violent resistance. This happened in 1973 in the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is now called Uttarakhand. and the government had issued orders for or given permits to contractors for timber logging. And when the contractors came to cut the trees, a large number of villagers hugged the trees and prevented the contractors for many months from cutting these trees. And this was a movement started by Sri Sundarlal Bahuguna, and this is a front runner for all environmental campaigns, not only in India, for many campaigns across the world as well. So even now, whenever people talk about cutting trees, everybody talks about the Chipko Moment and how it was very successful, because ultimately the government had to cancel the permits given to the contractors. In 2011, Anna Hazare started the India Against Corruption movement. Within a few days, it spread like wildfire, and the people across the country, including people like us, who took to the streets protesting against the corruption and asking for enough laws to prevent corruption. It was again a successful movement because it had mass participation of people. There was no political agenda in this. Anna Hazare had no political affiliations, and ultimately the parliament passed the Lok Ayukta and the Right to Information bills. The Jallikattu Protest 2017, another interesting example. The Supreme Court had passed an order banning Jallikattu, and a few people gathered in the marina. It was a very organic protest. There was no political party behind it. There were no organizers for the protest. A few people gathered at the Marina Beach, and within a couple of days, this number had grown to lakhs of people. And within the next couple of days, lakhs of people around Tamil Nadu in various towns and villages had gathered on the streets. And the protest had a very festival kind of atmosphere. There was singing and dancing. People were preparing food. There were entire families camping there, and there were people bringing food from outside and serving the people. So it was a very nice, peaceful kind of atmosphere. Unfortunately, in the last 1 or 2 days, some anti-social elements infiltrated into the protest, but still, it is considered to be one of the most successful, peaceful protests in India. And this again became a front runner for many such protests being planned across the country. The school strike for climate, it was started by Greta Thunberg. She went and sat as a single girl saying, "I will not go to school because the governments across the world are not taking any action against climate change." And within a few weeks, a large number of school children sat on the streets saying, "We will not go to school," and this became a global movement. And Greta Thunberg suddenly became the face of the movement for combating climate change. And she has now become the ambassador for the fight against climate change. She is invited by governments around the world, and she goes and talks at bodies like the United Nations. So this again was a very peaceful, non-violent kind of protest or resistance, which has brought about a lot of attention to the issue of climate change, which is one of the most serious problems facing the world. So we can see from these examples that Satyagraha remains as powerful a tool for civic protest today as it was 100 years back. This is the wonderful legacy that Bapuji has left us. Thank you very much.